Have you ever frozen mid-sentence? Your brain just loading like a slow internet connection?
Oh, absolutely. It is the worst.
Right, and it is just because you could not remember if a verb needed an ing at the end. It is a deeply frustrating moment. You know exactly what you want to say in your native language. The thought is, it is crystal clear in your mind.
But the moment you actually try to speak?
Yes, exactly. You are completely paralyzed by this massive invisible wall of grammatical rules. Today, we are exploring a radically different philosophy of learning. We are looking at the natural fluency approach.
Which is quite a controversial method in some circles.
It is. It suggests that adult learners should completely abandon studying formal grammar rules. The core idea is that we must treat English the way a child learns their mother tongue, by living it, not studying it. And I am taking the position that this intense focus on natural input, mimicking, and phrase building is really the only true cure for perfection paralysis.
I see.
It is the real path to authentic, joyful communication.
Well, and I will be arguing that while natural immersion is a beautiful thing, the foundational premise here, treating adult brains exactly like baby brains, is both biologically and practically flawed. Completely discarding the mechanics of grammar does not liberate an adult learner. Instead, I believe it severely limits their ability to communicate complex, nuanced thoughts accurately.
Okay. To begin this discussion, I think we have to look honestly at the traditional classroom. We must recognize that the traditional approach to teaching English has been a massive, heartbreaking failure for millions of adults.
It certainly has its flaws.
It is more than just flaws. We treat a living, breathing language as if it were a static subject to be memorized. We treat it exactly like history or geography.
People definitely view it as a test they need to pass. That much is true.
Exactly. They sit in classrooms feeling miserable, trying to memorize the mathematical difference between the present perfect and the past perfect tense. But language is simply a tool. Let us think about the analogy of driving a car.
Okay, let us hear it.
You do not need to understand the precise mechanics of an internal combustion engine to drive to the grocery store, right?
Sure.
You do not need to know how the spark plugs ignite the fuel or how the transmission shifts gears. You just need to know how to steer, how to press the pedals, and how to watch the road. Grammar rules are the mechanics under the hood. Speaking, listening, and connecting with human beings, that is the actual driving.
I hear your frustration with the classroom setting. I really do. And I agree completely that connection is the ultimate goal. The joy of human connection is why we learn in the first place.
Right.
However, I come at it from a different way. Your car analogy actually proves my point. I must strongly challenge it.
Wait, how so? Steering the car gets you exactly where you need to go.
It gets you where you need to go on a sunny day on a perfectly paved road when everything is functioning flawlessly. But what happens when the car breaks down?
Well,
What happens when you encounter a massive detour and you need to drive off-road into completely unfamiliar territory? If you do not understand the mechanics under the hood, you are completely stranded. Telling adult learners that they can achieve true fluency without focusing on formal grammar rules at all, it is a dangerous overcorrection.
But they are not stranded. They just, they find another way to communicate the thought.
They are stranded if they need to express something precise. Dropping the rules entirely might relieve their anxiety initially. It feels good in the short term, I admit that.
It feels great.
But it leaves them without the foundational tools required to construct novel, sophisticated ideas when the conversation goes beyond simple, everyday topics.
I think that assumes we can only learn the mechanics by studying a manual. But the mechanics of the language do not need to be explicitly studied because they are absorbed naturally.
Naturally?
Yes. Think about how we actually acquire language in the first place. Think about a baby.
But an adult is not a baby.
Biologically, no, I agree. But the mechanism of input remains incredibly powerful. Before a baby says a single word, they spend an entire year doing nothing but listening.
Yes, absorbing.
Exactly. They do not have a rule book. They absorb the rhythms, the sounds, and the patterns of the people around them. Our brains are extraordinary natural pattern recognition machines. The key here is focusing on, input over output.
I agree that input is crucial, but
Let me just explain how the input works for an adult. You cannot pour water out of an empty jug. If an adult feeds their brain high-quality input that they genuinely enjoy, the brain figures out the grammar automatically.
automatically.
Yes, this is the core of natural fluency. If you are obsessed with cricket, you watch cricket commentary. If you love gaming or cooking, you watch creators in simple, everyday English. You watch web series with English subtitles. When you focus on content that brings you joy, your brain naturally absorbs the structural patterns without the pain of conscious study.
The image of a child absorbing language is beautiful. There is a profound joy in watching a child learn to speak. But we must address the cognitive neuroscience here.
Okay,
The baby analogy is fundamentally flawed because a child's brain is highly plastic. It has specifically evolved to map a first language onto a blank slate. An adult does not have a blank slate.
no, they do not, but
An adult already has a native language deeply hardwired into their neural pathways.
the brain still recognizes patterns. It does not lose that ability just because we grow up.
It recognizes patterns, yes, but it filters those new patterns through the old wiring. You cannot simply bypass decades of native language programming. Let us take a practical example from this approach. The natural fluency approach suggests that adults should change their internal monologue, right?
Right.
They should narrate their day to themselves, thinking, the tea is hot while making breakfast.
Which is a highly effective way to practice without pressure.
It is, until you realize that an adult trying to do this is actively fighting against their mother tongue. You cannot passively absorb complex grammar just by watching a gaming video, because your adult brain will inevitably try to map those English words onto the grammatical structure of your native language.
Well,
If your native language puts the verb at the end of the sentence, your brain will want to put the English verb at the end of the sentence. That is why you need structural rules. The rules act as a necessary, conscious bridge to override your existing neural wiring.
but that is exactly my point. It is exactly because of that native language wiring that studying formal grammar fails so miserably in real-time conversation.
Wait, how does it fail? It provides the blueprint.
Because it creates an unbelievable cognitive load. When adults study grammar rules, they fall into a trap. I call it the double translation dance.
Okay, walk me through that.
Imagine a learner trying to speak. First, they think of a concept in their native language. Second, they search their working memory for the individual English words. Third, they apply a conscious grammar formula to arrange those words.
Right.
They check if the subject is singular or plural. They check the tense. And then, finally, they speak.
But that is just the process of learning. It gets faster over time.
It is exhausting. By the time they finish that mental math, the conversation has moved on. The person they are talking to is already looking at their watch. The workaround for adults is not to memorize more grammar formulas. The solution is to use a method called chunking.
Chunking. So memorizing phrases instead of words.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. It is much deeper than just memorizing. To bypass the translation dance, we stop learning isolated words entirely.
Interesting.
Think of it like building a house. Grammar is forcing a learner to lay individual bricks, one by one, while checking a blueprint every 5 seconds. Chunking is using prefabricated walls. You drop entire sections into place instantly. Instead of learning the word mind and the grammatical rules for how to use it, you memorize the entire block of sound. Do you mind if
I see. So you are treating the entire phrase as a single vocabulary item.
Precisely. From a cognitive standpoint, retrieving one chunk takes vastly less processing power than assembling 5 individual words and applying 3 rules. When you learn this way, you do not have to wonder if the next verb needs an ing at the end. You simply take the block and drop it into your conversation.
And how does a learner know how to pronounce these chunks naturally, without sounding like a robot reading a script?
You combine chunking with a technique called shadowing. You find a video of a native speaker and you mimic their exact tone, their speed, and even their dropped consonants. You are not just learning the words, you are building physical muscle memory in your mouth, lips, and vocal cords. You bypass the mental rulebook entirely and jump straight to smooth, natural speech.
Well, I will concede a very important point here. Shadowing is an absolutely excellent technique for building physical muscle memory. Our articulatory organs literally adapt to the sounds of our native language over time, so physically retraining the mouth is necessary.
Exactly.
But let us look closely at the core concept of chunking.
It is highly effective for reducing anxiety.
It is highly effective for ordering a coffee or asking for directions, yes. Do you mind if I sit here? That prefabricated wall works perfectly. But what happens when the learner needs to build a house with a completely unique architecture?
What do you mean by that?
Chunking is finite. Human experience is infinitely complex. We do not communicate purely in standard pre-built phrases. What happens when a learner needs to express a highly specific, complex, deeply personal thought that simply does not fit into a pre-built chunk?
Well, they can usually combine chunks to get their point across.
But eventually, the chunks run out. This is where we have to talk about what grammar actually is. Grammar is not a restriction. It is not a cage meant to punish students.
It certainly feels like a cage to many.
It might feel that way, but grammar is a mathematical generative formula. It is the system that allows human beings to generate an infinite number of completely new sentences that have never been spoken before in the history of the world. If you only know chunks, your ability to express yourself has a hard limit. If you understand the grammatical rules, your ability to express yourself is truly limitless.
But look at what happens when people try to use that limitless system in real life. They freeze. And that brings us to a very liberating, very practical concept, the good enough rule.
The good enough rule. Okay, explain how that works when you step outside your pre-built chunks.
When we step outside our chunks and try to express something new, yes, mistakes will inevitably happen. The natural fluency approach embraces this messy reality. It completely removes the shame of making an error. Because here is the hard truth that traditional classrooms ignore. No one cares about your perfect grammar except English teachers.
I am sorry, but I just do not buy that. Let me tell you why. But first, give me an example of what you mean.
All right, let us say a learner walks up to someone on the street and says, "Yesterday, I go to market." What actually happens in the real world?
The listener notices the incorrect tense immediately.
They might notice it, yes, but they absolutely understand the intent. They do not stop the conversation to demand the past tense went. They do not grade the learner. They simply smile and point the way to the market. The transaction of human connection is 100% successful. Perfection causes paralysis. The most fluent, effective, magnetic communicators I have ever met are not the ones with perfect syntax.
Who are they then?
They are the ones who stumble, who laugh at their own mistakes, who fix the error on the fly, and who confidently keep the conversation moving. They prioritize human connection over mathematical precision. They survive on the good enough rule, and they are happier for it.
But look closely at your own example. The yesterday I go to market scenario is an entirely low-stakes situation. Yes, if you say that to a cashier or someone on the street giving directions, they will point you toward the vegetables. But language is not just used for buying tomatoes.
It is used for daily survival and connection.
It is used for much more than that. What happens in a professional setting? Let us elevate the stakes. What happens if you are a civil engineer trying to explain a critical safety flaw in a bridge design to your team?
Well, you would still use the vocabulary of engineering. The point would get across.
But the precision of the grammar dictates the reality of the danger. There's a massive difference between saying the support beam is failing, the support beam has failed, and the support beam might fail. If you rely on the good enough rule and use the wrong tense there, you are not just causing a slight confusion, you are potentially causing a disaster.
That is a very extreme example.
Then let us look at a doctor explaining a diagnosis, or a professional defending a thesis, or a business owner negotiating a contract. In these environments, chronic grammatical errors severely damage your credibility. They destroy precision.
I just think that
The good enough rule is perfectly fine for a beginner. Making mistakes is a necessary part of the learning process. I am not arguing for shame or perfectionism.
But you are arguing for a standard that causes anxiety.
No, I am arguing against a permanent ceiling. Ignoring the rules entirely guarantees that good enough becomes exactly that, a permanent ceiling. You trap the learner in a state of perpetual amateurism. You prevent them from ever achieving true, respected mastery of the language because they never learn how to self-correct their complex thoughts.
I hear you, but I still think you are trapping learners in a textbook by insisting on that level of structural perfection from the start. I do not believe it creates a permanent ceiling at all.
How does a learner break through that ceiling without understanding the rules?
Because the ceiling only exists if the natural input stops. If an engineer surrounds themselves with complex, high-level English input, reading engineering journals, watching technical lectures, listening to professional peers, their brain will naturally adjust to that higher standard over time, just as it did with simple phrases.
But again, that takes incredibly massive amounts of passive exposure to overcome the native language filter.
Which is entirely possible today. The true beauty of the natural fluency philosophy is how it integrates into daily life without suffering. We can create what I call a digital English bubble.
A digital bubble. Walk me through how a learner actually builds this.
You do not need to move to London or New York to immerse yourself anymore. If you are listening to us right now on your phone, what language is your operating system in? Changing that is step 1. You change your phone's system language to English. You use your voice assistant, talking to Siri exclusively in English.
Ah, okay.
You search for your dinner recipes and your movie reviews in English. You are forcing your brain to engage with the language multiple times a day in tiny, completely effortless doses.
That kind of environmental design is very smart. I will give you that.
Exactly, because the ultimate secret to fluency is consistency, not effort. It is the 10-minute vlog you watch while relaxing on the sofa, not the agonizing 5-hour study block on a Sunday afternoon. By embracing the messiness, by laughing at our mistakes, and by discarding the heavy burden of the rule book, learning becomes a joyful hobby.
Right.
It becomes a lifestyle rather than a painful duty. That joy is the exact fuel needed to sustain the consistency required to reach true fluency.
Well, I will concede that we have found a very important point of agreement here. Integrating the language into your daily lifestyle, turning it into a joyful hobby, and relying on daily consistency over agonizing sporadic effort, these are fantastic, scientifically proven strategies.
It completely changes the emotional relationship with the language, you know?
It does. The digital English bubble is an incredibly smart way to ensure continuous exposure, and I fully support surrounding yourself with the language in every way possible. However, my final position remains firm. Discarding the rulebook entirely is a profound mistake.
Even if the rulebook is what causes the initial paralysis.
Yes, because the paralysis is temporary, but the limitation of ignorance is permanent. True fluency requires both the joy of driving the car and a fundamental understanding of the mechanics. Adult learners have a distinct, powerful advantage over babies. We have the capacity for deep analytical thought. We have logic.
We do.
Why would we intentionally throw away the most efficient analytical tool we possess to understand the underlying structure of a new language? Combining the joyful, natural immersion you describe with a clear, targeted understanding of generative grammar creates a much stronger, more capable, and ultimately more liberated speaker.
I appreciate how clearly you have articulated the value of that structural foundation. We both agree deeply that a language must be lived. It must echo in our daily lives, and we both know that daily consistency will always overcome sporadic, intense effort. We just differ on whether the rulebook is a vital stepping stone or a heavy stumbling block.
Exactly. It really comes down to how we view the adult mind and its capabilities. The mechanics can either empower you to build entirely new ideas from scratch, or, as you rightly pointed out, they can trap you in a cycle of hesitation and anxiety. It requires a lot of self-awareness to know which method actually serves your personal goals best.
And that self-awareness begins the very next moment you try to speak. The next time you are walking down the street or making breakfast, listen closely to that little voice inside your head narrating your day. As you attempt to switch that internal monologue into English, ask yourself a question. Do you prefer the wild, messy, joyful freedom of the good enough role? Or do you crave the structured, limitless precision of the rulebook,